chapter, we took a quick look around the Revit environment and we learned how to open and create projects. So I'm in a file called Levels and Grids, and this was created from the commercial template project at the end of the last chapter. This is just the default commercial template. Nothing's been changed yet. And what I want to start off with is most buildings have some floor levels, and many buildings have some sort of a column grid, locations where the columns occur. Both of these things we can designate in Revit. We can add floor levels that actually represent the actual stories of the building, the actual floor levels of the building, a landing on the stairs or a button on the elevator, if you will. And we can create column grids that locate where the various columns will be. So in this movie, I'd like to do both of those things to kind of get us set up so that we can start adding geometry. So the way that you add levels is to go to one of your elevation views. So I'm going to scroll down here in the project browser to my elevations, and it doesn't really matter which one I open. So I'm going to open up the south elevation just by double clicking it. And as you can see, I've got several dashed lines running across the screen. Now, these dashed lines represent the edges of the floor level. So think of this as the finished floor height for level 1. I've got it highlighted. You can see that one's level 1. Now, I'm going to come over here and put my mouse at this right-hand side, and I'm going to roll it slightly to zoom in, just so we can read those labels a little bit better. And you can see that in addition to level 1, I have 2 footing levels, and I have a roof level. If we scroll back up here in the project browser, levels are the primary datum element in your project. So they're like a horizontal plane that cuts through the building and establishes a height. Furthermore, levels can be associated with floor plans. So if you look here on screen, you see this level 1. You'll notice that the name is level 1, and there's a corresponding level 1 floor plan and level 1 ceiling plan. So both of those are associated to this level 1 floor plan. Notice here there's a roof level floor plan. There's also a bottom of footing and a top of footing. Now, for this project, we're going to keep it relatively simple. So let's go ahead and add another level to this building. I want to add a second floor to this building. So I'm going to drag with my wheel slightly to give myself a little bit of room. And I could rename the roof level and then add a new roof up above, but I actually find it easier to select my roof level. I'm going to click right on the text here that makes up the height of that level. It's currently at 12'8", and I'm going to change that to 30 and press enter. That will move the roof up to 30 feet and allow plenty of space here in between for me to add the new level. Now, to add the new level, I'm going to zoom back out so I can see the full extent of the level. And then here on the Architecture tab, over here on the Datum panel on the right, I will find a level button. I'm going to click that. If you move your mouse around in the middle of the space between level 1 and roof, toward the end, you'll see a small little dashed line appear when you're lined up with the end. So I want to make sure it's lined up with the end, and I'm going to click. And then I'm going to drag it over to the opposite end, and again, make sure it lines up with that little dashed line. And when it does, I'll click again. Now, what you'll see is that that actually created the level, and over here, I get a level 2 floor plan. I get a level 2 ceiling plan, and there's actually now a level 2 structural plan. Now, it turns out I didn't really want the level 2 structural plan, so I can actually just select it here on the project browser and delete it. Okay, so I'm only interested in the floor plans and the ceiling plans at the moment. Now, I'm going to click back over here in the drawing window, click my modify tool to cancel the command. I want to select it here. And I want to make sure that that level 2 is at 16 feet. So I'm going to click right on here and change it to 16. And notice that it will move that level up. Now I want an additional level above the roof to mark where the parapet is going to be. And this level, I don't want any associated floor plans. So I'm going to click the level button one more time. And on the options bar here, this checkbox and button is why we got floor plans when we created level 2. If you click the floor plan types, you can see that it's ceiling plan, floor plan, and structural plan. So had I clicked here first, I could have removed structural plan before creating level 2. In this case, what I'm going to do is just simply uncheck the box and not create any floor plans at all. I'm going to highlight over here above the roof, and notice the small little blue dimension that appears on the left-hand side. I want to make sure that says 3 feet, and then I'll click. Drag it across to the other side here. When it's lined up, I'll click again. Click the modify tool to cancel out of the command. And then I'm going to zoom in on that location. Now, Revit will just name it level 3, so all I have to do is click on it, highlight the name, click again, and type in the name that I want it to have. And I'll go ahead and click in empty white space to deselect. Notice the color here. If it's black, it's letting you know there are no floor plans. If it's blue, it's letting you know there are floor plans. Now, those are the levels. The next thing I want to do is add some grids. So you could add the grids right here in the elevation view as well, but I think it's a little easier to add them in the floor plan. So I'm going to go back to level 1 floor plan. And then here on the data panel, you'll see the grid button is available. I'll click that. And all I need to do is pick a point down here somewhere, drag it straight up to about the length that I want, and click again. That creates the first grid. I'll come up lined up with it, add about 24 feet away, click, and click. Keep it lined up to place the second grid. It didn't quite come in exactly 24 feet, so before I go further, I'll just change that number by clicking right on the text and making it 24. Now I'm going to roll in just slightly with the wheel here. Notice the first grid was number 1, and the second one automatically became 2. Let's just keep going, and I'll do a couple more. And I'm just going to keep these at 24 feet for right now. You can make them any distance that your design requires. And I'll do about 5 or 6 of these. Now, the next one I'm going to run horizontally this way, and notice it goes to grid number 7. Before you go to the next one, just click right on the number 7 and change that to big letter A and press enter. And when you do, the next one will become big letter B. I'm going to click on this dimension here, make that 24. And then I'll do 2 more, and these are going to actually be at 28. Now I'm going to zoom out enough that I can see everything, cancel out of the command. So I have lettered grids over here, numbered grids over here. Notice these are too short. I want them to intersect through this one. Click any grid line. It doesn't matter which one. Notice this big open circle right here. If I start dragging it, notice that Revit will not only move the one that I'm dragging, but it will move all of them and keep them all connected together. Finally, if we take a look back at our south elevation, or really any of our elevations, and let's zoom out, notice that grids will appear in the elevation views as well as the plan. So this is why I said it really didn't matter if we created them in plan or elevation, but I prefer to create them in plan. So the levels mark the actual floor locations, the finished floor locations in your building, and the grids are going to be useful later to help us lay out the geometry, such as the columns and so forth. And those two things are common in most buildings. Most buildings have floor levels. Most buildings have a column grid. So it's a pretty good idea to get started with those early in the project. Doesn't necessarily have to be the first thing you do, but it's not a bad idea to get them in there early. In this movie, I'd like to introduce you to walls. Walls are perhaps the most basic element of any building, so it makes sense for us to spend a little time here learning how to use the wall tool. I'm in a file called walls, and this is just a saved version of the column grid layout that we created in the previous movie. We're going to look at laying out walls in 2 ways in this movie. We're going to lay them out very precisely relative to the column grid, and we're also going to lay them out in a little bit more of a sketch fashion, just so you can compare and contrast the 2 techniques. Now, there's no one right or wrong way to do it, so you can certainly focus on the technique that works best for you. So I'm currently in the level 1 floor plan, and the wall tool is located here on the architecture tab. Now you can just click the top half of this button, but if you happen to click the bottom half and this flyout opens up, just make sure that you're choosing wall architectural. When you do, there's lots of options that become available, and we don't want to necessarily get hung up on every single option, but there are a few that we want to take a look at. The first is right here on the properties palette, there's a drop-down list at the top, and this is probably the most important setting because you need to establish what kind of wall you're creating. Revit calls this a type, so what type of wall we want, because that wall type actually will configure several of the other settings for you. So if you change types, it might mess up all the other settings. So always do the type first. And the type that I want to use in this case is just a generic 12-inch wall. For the purposes of this model, we're just going to stick with generic walls, which are just really basic walls. If you want more detailed walls, you can look at some of the examples that we cover in the Revit Essential training here in the lynda.com library. So I've got generic 12-inch wall. That's my basic wall. And the next thing I want to consider is its height. Now, notice that we're setting the height here, but next to that it says unconnected. If you click that drop down for unconnected, it turns out that there's a list of all your floor levels there. Now, in the previous movie, we laid out the floor levels, and so here we can actually start to assign the height of the walls to match one of the heights of those levels. So I want it to match the height at the parapet, so I'm going to choose that from the list. The next thing I want to consider is the location line. You can draw the walls from their center line or from their faces. I'm going to draw the exterior walls first. And I think for the exterior walls, it makes a certain amount of sense to use the finish face exterior. That means whatever point I locate for that wall will stay put at the exterior face of the wall. And then later, if we thicken the wall or make it thinner, the exterior face will stay where it is and it'll get thicker or thinner relative to that. If I start clicking on screen right now, it'll draw directly relative to that finish face exterior. Let me click a start point right here and then zoom in a little bit right where my mouse is. And notice that we're drawing by that face of the wall. Now, if I start this way, I'm drawing somewhat randomly. So what I'm going to do is press escape just one time. Make sure you do not press more than once. If you press more than once, it'll cancel you all the way out of the command. You'll have to start all the settings over again. But if you press just one time, it just cancels that current wall, but keeps me in the wall command. Notice that over here, I have an offset feature. Well, with this feature, I can put in any number I want. I'm going to put in 2 feet and press enter. Now, the way this works is wherever you click now, your wall will actually draw 2 feet away from that. And to be more precise, the finish face exterior of the wall is 2 feet away from the points I click. So let me escape again one time. So I don't cancel all the way out of the command, just the one time, and move your mouse here by the grid intersection. Now, if you're not sure which one you're doing, you can zoom out a little bit. I want to be here on grid line 2 at the top. So the intersection between grid line 2 and column line A, I'm going to click right there and start to move my mouse. So now, if you measured from grid line A to the finished face exterior of that wall, that would be 2 feet. That's where the 2-foot offset is. Now, if your wall is going down instead of up, you can tap the space bar. Let me show you. If I tap the space bar, it flips down. I tap it again, it flips up. So make sure it's going up or away from the grid. In other words, I'm going to zoom or pan over to here and snap to grid intersection A6. Then I'm going to turn the corner and let me zoom out again. Come down here to D6, turn the corner again, and I'll come back here to grid line 2. Press escape one time, and you can see that I've created 3 walls that are all offset exactly 2 feet away from the intersections of those grid lines. Now I want to draw some of the interior walls, so I'm going to change types. So make sure you're still in the wall command. If you've canceled out, just click the wall tool again in the architecture tab. And I'm going to use the drop down here and choose a thinner size. I'm going to choose generic 5-inch this time. That will reset many of the settings here. So I want to verify my settings. Instead of unconnected, this time I want to go up to level 2. So that's going to take this wall and it's going to go just up to the second level. I'm going to leave the wall center line as the location line this time. But over here, I want to set the offset back to 0. So I'm going to put in 0, press enter, and then I'm going to come down here and highlight the exterior wall at the bottom and grid line 4. And you'll notice that Revit says I'm going to get an intersection right there. And I'll click, pull this wall straight up. You can go at any angle you want, but I want to make sure I'm going straight up until it intersects the opposite wall and click again. Now, if you zoom your mouse in on that location, you'll notice that Revit has automatically cleaned up the intersection between those 2 walls. So that's pretty nice. Now I'm going to zoom back out. Now you don't have to draw your walls relative to the grid lines at all. In fact, you can draw the walls anywhere you like. So for the next few walls, I'm just going to rough them in by eye, and then later we'll come back and move them around. I'm going to come over here just a little to the left of column line 5, click a point on the exterior wall, pull it straight down The dimension will help me a little bit. I'll go about 18 feet or so, pull it over to the right about 22 feet or so, and then come back up to the exterior wall. Notice how I didn't get too hung up on exactly how far I was going. I just did a rough. Okay, I'm eyeballing or I'm sketching right now, and then later I'll refine that sketch more precisely. Let me divide this space in two by just clicking between those two walls. Let's divide this space in two by clicking between those two walls. Over here by column line B, we're going to enter the restaurant. So I'm going to create a little vestibule here just by creating a little L-shaped wall configuration. This connection to the next wall, Revit calls chain. And you can see that up on the options bar because the chain checkbox is selected. To break the chain, press escape once. Again, one time is important. That will break the chain but keep me in the wall command. And then for my final wall, I'm going to come a little to the right of grid line 5, kind of pull down here just above grid line C, and then I'll go back and finish it over at grid line 4. And that's going to be kind of the back of house area. I'm going to escape now all the way out of the command, either 2 escapes or click the modify tool. Either one will work. And take a look at my final product here. Those are the basic walls that I need for the layout of the restaurant. They're not terribly precise yet, but one of the things that's very powerful about Revit is if you later come in and select one of these walls and move it, notice that all the other walls will stay connected and associated with it. So in the next movie, we're going to learn how to do those kind of movements very precisely so that we can control exactly the sizes of all those spaces. But before we leave this file, let's just take a look at how this thing looks in 3D. If you look up here on your project browser, you'll notice that we've got a floor plans category, a ceiling plans, and elevations, but we don't have a 3D category. Up here on the toolbar, there's this small little doghouse icon. It looks like a little birdhouse or a doghouse. If you click that, that's the default 3D view. Notice that it takes us to a 3D isometric, and here on the project browser, it created a new 3D views category and a new 3D view called just 3D. If you want to get a better look at how your model is shaping up here, hold your shift key down and drag your wheel. So you're holding in both the shift key and the wheel, and you can orbit and spin this model around. And now you can see very clearly that our 3 exterior walls go the full height of the building, and all of our interior walls are set down at level 2. So there's plenty more for us to do. That's the basic process that's involved in laying out some walls. You can either lay out the walls very precisely relative to a column grid or some other geometry, or you can lay them out in a very rough fashion and then come back and modify them later. The choice is yours, and it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. In early schematic design phase, it's okay to rough in the locations of walls and other geometry where you think they might go, but at some point you're going to want to refine those layouts and make them a little bit more precise. Now in Revit, we do this primarily with dimensions. We have other ways, but dimensions provide a really quick and easy way to move geometry around. And so in this movie, I'd like to show you 2 kinds of dimensions, temporary and permanent dimensions. So I'm in a file called dimensions, and it's got a really rough wall layout here. And let's focus on these 2 walls in the middle first of all. Now I'm going to select this wall here in the center, this horizontal wall, by clicking on it. And what you'll see is when I click on it, these 2 dimensions will appear. One that goes to the exterior wall down below, and another one that goes to the next nearest interior wall. Now, that's the first thing that you want to understand about temporary dimensions is Revit just sort of decides what nearby geometry it thinks is the best reference. Let me deselect this wall, and the way you deselect an object is to just click an empty white space, and then I'm going to roll my wheel to zoom in a little bit. Now, I'm going to zoom in far enough that I no longer see those 2 walls that it was referencing a moment ago, and when I select the wall this time, notice that Revit chooses different reference points. Which reference points you choose really depend on a variety of factors, not the least of which is what you're zoomed in on. In this case, I actually know the distance that I want it to be off of this grid line, so that was actually a quick and easy way to establish that. So with the wall still selected, all I have to do to interact with these temporary dimensions is highlight the piece of text right here and click it. Notice that will make the text editable, and I can type in whatever number I want that value to actually be. So in this case, I'm going to type in 8 for 8 feet, and when I press enter, that will actually move the wall in order to make this dimension 8 feet. Now, let me change the selection. I'm going to click an empty space to deselect, and I'm going to change the selection to this wall instead. This time, I get dimensions that reference the two vertical walls, and notice it's ignoring the grid line in this case. Revit tends to favor the other walls over the grid lines, but if you want to, you can force it to use another reference point like a grid line easily enough. How do you do that? Well, you see these small little dots that appear on the dimensions? Those are witness line grips. And you can take those dots and you can drag them. And I'm going to drag it until I highlight this column grid line 5, and then let go. That will tell me that the current distance between that wall and that grid line is 2 feet. So I'm going to click right in that dimension, and I'm going to change it to 3 foot 4 inches. Now, we've talked about how to input feet. You just type the number. To input feet and inches, you need to either use the foot and inch symbols, or you can use your space bar. Let me show you an example. I'm going to do 3 space 4. That's going to be 3 feet and 4 inches. So the space separates the feet from the inches. When I press enter, it will move the wall to that new location. Let's continue with another example. Let me scroll down to here. I want this wall to be 4 foot 8 inches from this wall. So I'm going to select it. And notice that again, Revit is choosing different walls, so I can repeat the same trick. Just drag this witness line, snap to that wall. And then let's click in here and let's use an alternate method of feet and inches. I can do 4 feet symbol, which is just the apostrophe mark, 8. And when I press enter, that will be interpreted as 4 feet 8 inches. So there's a couple different ways you can do that, and really they both do the same thing, so the choice is yours. Now, as you can see, I'm having to move a lot of witness lines. So perhaps you might be looking for a way to input these dimension values without having to move so many of the witness lines manually. Well, you can set up dimensions ahead of time that have the witness lines exactly where you want them to be, and place those dimensions and then use those to modify them. We call these permanent dimensions. So let's take a look at those. Up here on the quick access toolbar is the aligned dimension button. So I'm going to click that. When the dimension tool appears, I need to select at least 2 objects to be witness lines. So I'm going to select this wall right here and this wall right here. Now, it's important that you don't click again on the same locations, because if you do, you'll just remove that witness line. Make sure you only click each witness line one time. The final click in placing a permanent dimension is you have to place an empty white space. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to click in the empty space to place that dimension where I want it to go. Let me make another one. I'm going to go from this wall here to this column grid right there and click an empty white space to place it. Now, when you get out of that command with the modify tool, and notice that these dimensions are left behind as actual objects on the screen. You could certainly use permanent dimensions when you actually want to report how big something is and print it out that way. But the other way that we can use these permanent dimensions is to help us control the temporary dimension behavior. Now, what you don't want to do is select the dimension and go right to the text. Notice that that brings up the dimension text dialog. That's not what we want here. I'm going to cancel that. You still want to make sure that you select the object that you want to move. I still want to make sure I select this wall. And then notice how that lit up that dimension text. Watch it again. I'm going to deselect. I'm going to select this wall and watch the text of that dimension. You see how it changes color and it kind of lights up? Now I can modify that value and make it 9 feet. Let's do it again with this one. I'm going to select this wall. Notice how that dimension lights up? I'm going to click in there and I'm going to change that to 2 feet. So the permanent dimensions give you even a little bit more control because you can place the dimensions in exact precise locations where you want them to go and then use them as temporaries to move your geometry around. So let's look at another example. Up here, I want to configure these 2 toilet rooms and the storage room area, and I want to do all that very precisely. So I'm going to go back to the permanent dimension tool. And notice the default behavior that we're getting here is that Revit has highlighted the center lines of the walls, right? We get the center line here, we get the center line here. Now it is possible to move your mouse to the face of that wall and press the tab key. When you press the tab key, Revit will change selection. It'll cycle through the available options. If you press tab again, it'll go back to center. But each time I press tab, it'll cycle through the different options. I'm going to click to get the face of that wall. It's actually not necessary to keep tabbing each time. You could if you wanted to, but if you look over here on the options bar, there's a drop down here, and we can change the focus of this dimension to select the faces of these walls instead of the centers. Now notice that I've just placed several witness lines in the same string of dimensions. But remember, to complete the dimension, to finish it, you have to click an empty white space. Don't click again on one of the witness lines locations, because if you do, you're going to just be stuck in that command. All right, let's do one more dimension here to here and place it out here. Let me cancel out of the command with the modify tool, and let's clean all this up. For this location right here, I want this distance to be 15'8". I'm going to change selections to this wall. For this distance right here, I want to clear 5 feet. So I'm going to click in that dimension and put in 5 and press enter. And then for this location here, I want the size of this restroom to be 9'10". I'm going to do 9 space 10. And that sizes all of those. Now, I could add a new dimension to move this wall. I want it right in the middle to divide this space equally. But let's look at another option. I'm going to simply select the wall. You don't have to do all the movements with temporary dimensions. You could do the math here and try and figure it out, but I don't want to do that. Instead, notice that when I select an object, Revit takes me to the Modify tab. On the Modify tab, there's a bank of Modify tools. Among those Modify tools, we find the Move command, so I'm going to click that. And Revit is very good at finding key reference points. We call these snap points. For the start point of my move, I want the end point of this wall. That's a snap point. And for the end point of this move, I want to move up slightly until it gives me a little triangle shape and says the word midpoint. And then I want to click again, and that's going to snap exactly to the midpoint in that location. Let's look at another quick example. Another way you can use the Move tool is to select your object, go to Move, and I'm going to pick any base point this time, somewhere on the wall. I'm going to start moving to the left. When you move, doesn't matter how far I move, notice there's a dimension there, and that dimension is lit up in a blue color, kind of like a temporary dimension. Revit calls this a listening dimension. And if you start to type, your value will go right into that dimension. So in this case, I want to just make sure that I'm going exactly horizontal, doesn't matter how far, type 1 and press enter. And notice the result was that that wall moved exactly 1 foot to the left. So there's a few different ways that you can move things around to fine tune your layout and make things more precise. You can use permanent dimensions, you can use temporary dimensions, or you can use the move command. The basic process, you lay things out close to what you want them to be, and then you come back and refine them with these various tools. So now that you have the wall layout relatively fleshed out, it's time for some doors and windows. So to add doors and windows, I'm in a file called Doors and Windows, and we're zoomed in here on the upper portion of the floor plan. And over here on the Architecture tab, we have a door icon and a window icon. So I'm going to click the door icon. I'm not going to really change any of the settings, but let me just point out a few of them to you. Here in the Properties palette, we have a drop-down, like we did with walls, and that gives us some different size doors. So we have one kind of door. Revit calls that a family. So we have one door family, a single flush. And that door family has several types, they're called. The types are the different sizes. Now, the default size is 36 by 84, and that works fine for me for this, so I'm not going to actually change that. The default sill height is at 0. That makes sense too, because you typically want the door to be right down at the floor. So we're not going to raise it up or lower it down, so I don't need to change that. So I'm pretty good with any of the default settings. The only thing I need to do is place the door. Now you'll notice that if my mouse is in the middle of the screen somewhere, I get this little circle with a line through it. Basically, Revit's telling me, sorry, I can't put a door there. Well, we get a little bit of a clue down the status bar of what's going on. The message says, click on a wall to place the door. So before you put your mouse over a wall, you're not eligible to place. If I try to click, I won't get anything happening. But as soon as I move my mouse over a wall, you're going to see the door appear. Now, Revit has a name for this too. A door is considered a hosted element. And so it requires a wall host before it can be placed. So all your job is to highlight and then click on the appropriate host. So let's say that I wanted a door here between column lines 4 and 5. All I need to do is find the location I want and then click to place the door. Now, we discussed temporary dimensions in a previous movie. Notice that the temporary dimensions remain on screen after you place the door. Now, Revit did a nice job of centering that door directly between the two walls. Maybe you want that door to be positioned a little bit differently. Perhaps I wanted it to be, instead of 11 foot 10 here, maybe I only wanted it to be 10 feet off of that other wall. You can interact with those temporary dimensions with doors and windows the same way that you could with walls. So I can just simply type in 10 and press enter, and the door will move. Maybe the door is not swinging in the right direction. Currently, it's swinging off to the right. Maybe I wanted it to the left. You'll notice these little grips on the door. If you click those, it will change the swing of the door. In fact, we could even swing it into the building or out of the building. You can change the direction any way you like. Now, recall the message down at the bottom of the screen. It said click on a wall to place the door, and then in parentheses it said space bar to flip the instance. So let me show you an example of that. I'm going to move over here to this toilet room. And notice that the door, when I have it swinging into the room, is flipping the wrong way. Now, I could click and place it and then use those little grips I just showed you to flip it. Or you can tap your space bar and flip it before you place it. So either one is fine. It's entirely up to you. Let's move over to this one. So now watch. If I subtly move left or right, it flips in the room or out of the room. Tap the space bar to change the direction. If you just kind of keep your thumb on the space bar and move your mouse around on the screen, it becomes very quick and easy for you to place a variety of doors. And so I'm just going to make sure that I have a door going into each of these rooms. And again, keep in mind that if you're not quite satisfied with the location, you can always come in and modify the dimension. Now, once you have those basics down, you know everything you need to do to place windows. It works exactly the same way. So let's cancel out of this command with the Modify tool. On the Architecture tab, let's click the Window button. Here it is on the Properties palette. The family is fixed. The types are these sizes. The default size is a 36 by 48. In this case, I'm going to change that to the larger one, a 36 by 72. The default sill height for that window is 1 foot off the floor. I'm going to raise that up to 2 feet off the floor. So you can make any of these changes you want. And then I'm going to come in here, highlight a wall. It works the same way. You can't place it out in empty space, but you can highlight a wall and click to place the window. I'm going to pan up slightly and place another one, and another one, and another one, and so on. If you want to, you can keep placing them this way, or after you've placed a few, you can escape out of the command. I'm going to double escape to get all the way out. I can select this window, and maybe I want to put a little space here between it. So I'm going to do about 6 feet. Now, let me zoom in slightly here. And let's say that I like having 2 windows and then a space and then 2 more windows. So I want another window the same distance as this one. I'm going to select this window right here. Now, like we saw in the Dimensions movie, when you select an object, Revit takes you to the Modify tab. On the Modify tab, we have a series of Modify tools. We looked at the Move tool in that movie, but let's look at the Copy tool in this movie. The Copy tool works exactly the same way as Move. I'm going to click it. You still need to indicate a base point and then a new point for the copy. Well, in this case, I want this distance to be the same when I copy it over here. So I'm going to choose the center line of the nearby window as the base point. And think of it as picking this window up on a fishing pole and then walking with the fishing pole. So I'm carrying the window over here, and then I'm going to snap right to the midpoint of that window. And you see how it maintains exactly the same spacing. Sometimes you can get just 1 or 2 in place where you want them, and then use tools like Copy to quickly replicate them without having to do a lot of extra work. So either method is perfectly valid. You can use whichever one you prefer. But before we leave this file, let's take a look at how things are shaping up in 3D. So you may recall that to get to a 3D view, we can use this little icon right here on the toolbar, this one that looks like a little birdhouse, and I'll just click that, and that will open up the default 3D view. And again, recall that the default 3D view is just right here on the project browser, so that's another way that we can get to it. And also, you may recall that if we hold down the Shift key and drag with the wheel, that we can spin this thing around. And zooming and panning works here as well. So if you want to get a closer look, you can just roll your wheel to zoom in and see how things are shaping up. So for this example, we use the default door and window families that are included in the template we started with. There are many, many more interesting door and window families available. In the next movie, we're going to look at how to load families, and we can load any kind of family, including doors and windows, using the techniques we'll learn there. Walls, doors, and windows are certainly your most basic building blocks, and they certainly start to make a layout come together. But there's many other objects that we need to add to our building models in order to complete them. It might be plumbing fixtures, it might be furniture and equipment, other kinds of doors and windows, columns, you name it. All of these things are possible in Revit, and some of them have their own dedicated tools and some of them don't. But what they all have in common is that each of these elements that we can add to our model are called families in the Revit environment. So everything is a family, and a family is just a discrete item that you can place in a model. And we have lots of different kinds of families. If the object that you want to place doesn't have its own dedicated command, in the previous movie we added doors and windows, and they each had their own tool, but furniture and equipment and plumbing fixtures, they don't all have their own tool. What we use instead is this component tool. So a very generic way to refer to just any kind of family is to just simply say you're going to place a component in your model. Let's start with that. I'm going to click the component tool, and here on the list, you'll see the components that are already preloaded in my project. Now, my toilet room areas need some plumbing fixtures. So why don't we start with that? So I'm going to come over here and zoom in on the toilet room areas here, just rolling the wheel. And I've got this single sink here in my model. Now, it's a sink kitchen, so it's a kitchen sink, but for the time being, at the stage I'm at in this project, I'm really more interested in just a sink symbol, and we can swap out a more specific one later when we've chosen the actual unit that we're going to specify. So for now, I'm just going to use this default one and bring it into these toilet rooms. Now you can see it's pointing the wrong way. Like we've seen with other objects, if you tap the space bar, it will actually change the orientation. So we can rotate in 90-degree increments by just simply tapping space. So I'm going to place one of those sinks right about here and another one right about there. Open up the list again and choose a toilet this time. Now, this one you'll notice will not place freestanding. So this toilet is actually fairly similar to the doors and windows that we saw in the previous movie. The symbol will not appear until I highlight an eligible host, which is what I'm going to do right there. So I'll go ahead and place that in, and I'll place another one right here. Now let me stop there for a moment. Let's click cancel because these things are placed kind of randomly. And just like we saw with other objects, when you select them, you're going to see temporary dimensions appear on your screen. Now, we talked about these little witness grips in a previous movie. Let's talk about them again here. I want to measure this toilet 1'6" off the face of that wall, not the center of the wall. So you can drag this little dot like we did in the previous movie, but you can also just click it. When you click it, it will actually jump to the faces and then back to the center. Each time you click it, it'll cycle to a new location. Let me change this dimension to 1'6". And do the same thing over here. Click it. See how it went to the outside? I'll click it again. It goes to the inside. 1'6". And now those toilets are placed in the correct location. We could do the same thing with the sinks. Let's zoom out a little bit. We do have a dedicated column tool. You have structural and architectural, but for this example, I'm just going to stick with the architectural. And the default is a square column, which might work well in these locations. And you'll see that the column does a really nice job of kind of merging into the surrounding geometry. But if you want a different shape column, what you'll see is there isn't another shape here on the list. So in that case, what we need to do is load a family. The process we're going to use to load families is going to be similar regardless of the kind of family. So let's look at it here for our column first, and then we can repeat it for some other types of objects. Most of these elements that are eligible for load family will have their own dedicated load family button right here on the ribbon. So all you have to do is click that, and that will take you out to a browse window, and it will go to whatever library is loaded as the default for your system. In my case, that's the US Imperial Library. I'm going to go to the columns folder here, double click that, and I'm going to select this metal clad column right here. It's a slightly more interesting round shaped column. I'll click open, and now you can see that I get that slightly more decorative column, and I'll place that in a few locations here in my plan. Now, that same basic process could work for any kind of family. Let's say that we wanted to start putting some tables here in our restaurant space. Well, we can load a furniture family. Now, there isn't a furniture button here. We would go to the component button. And just like we just did for column, we would come over here to load family, double click the furniture folder. Now this folder is subdivided into subfolders. So I'm going to go to the tables folder, and I'm actually going to bring in two different tables this time. This one here is a round table that includes the chairs. And I'm also going to bring in this rectangular table. So if I select it, you can see what it looks like. If I want to select both, I can hold the control key down and click on both of them. So they're both highlighted. I'll click open. And now you'll see that there's the rectangular table. I've got a 72 by 30-inch size. There's other sizes. Here's the round table. So over here, we're going to do some booths. We'll do the rectangular table in that location. And then over here, we might want to do some tables with 4 chairs or some tables with 6 chairs. I'm just placing one of each because once we've got one of each placed, we can then go and use the copy command to make multiple copies. So to remind you how that works, I'll simply select my table with 4 chairs. That will take me to the Modify tab. Here's my copy button. And before I start to click my points this time, I'm going to check this box right here, which is multiple copy. Now I can pick my base point and then paste a new one and a new one and a new one and so on. And if you want to do that a little bit more precisely, just make sure that when you pick your new point, type in something. So I can type in 8 feet, and now those two copies are exactly 8 feet apart. You can place them by eye, or you can do them very precisely. So let's bring in one more family, and now this family is actually a custom family that I built. So despite the fact that you have lots of resources available to you in that Imperial Library folder, there's going to come a time when the specific family you're looking for is not there. You can search online, or you can even build it yourself, and that's what I've done in this case. So I'm going to go to the Component tool, click Load Family. So in the exercise files folder, I have this booth seating family. I'm going to open that up. And you can see that it comes in different sizes. So we can do a short one or a long one. I'm going to try and match the length of that table that I have right here. I'll do a 60-inch size. I need a slightly smaller table. I'll fix that later. And there it is. Now, I want one on the other side of that table. I can select it and use this command right here, Mirror Pick Axis. Now, what's really neat about most families is most of them have a center line. So I can very easily highlight the center line of this table, and I can mirror it to the other side. Once you have that, you can actually select all 3 of these and start to copy them. Now, a fast way to select all 3 is to click next to them, hold your mouse down, and drag with this dashed line box. And you see that box, anything that box touches will be selected. And I can select all 3 of those items and then go to copy and make my multiple copies. Now, if you want to learn how to build your own custom families, we have resources for that here at lynda.com. We talk about it a little bit in the essential training course, and then we have an entire course devoted to the family editor that you can check out as well. Let's take a look at how things are shaping up in 3D. So let's click our default 3D view icon. And you can kind of see a little peek of the table there through the window, but why don't we hold down the Shift key and drag with the wheel to kind of tip the model down so that we can look inside. So there's our decorative column, here's our table and chairs, and here's our 2 booths with their table. You can continue copying and adding additional components to begin fleshing out the layout here. So using the same process, you can load in additional families, including doors and windows, and refine the layout of your building. Getting up and running with Revit involves a lot more than modeling. But before we leave the topic of modeling behind, I'd like to look at several other modeling tools and techniques that you might want to be aware of. Now, our goal here isn't to go into great detail on any one of these tools. We've got Revit Essential Training here at lynda.com to help you along with that. What we're going to do, rather, is just look at sort of the highlights of some of the other parts and pieces that will likely be a part of many of the building models that you're going to work with in Revit. So I have a file here called Modeling Tools, and we're looking at a slightly more refined version of our restaurant building. And as you can see, it's got some glazing on the exterior walls here. It's got a roof structure already. So let's take a look at some of these features. Now, most buildings have roofs, so why don't we start there? Okay, there's a roof object right here, and then another one over here. And the most obvious thing about the roof that you can see is it's very easy to make a sloping roof. Now, a roof in Revit is what we call a sketch-based object. Now, if I select the roof, like most things in Revit, if you select them, they become semi-transparent while they're selected, so we can actually see right through the roof now into the building there. But with the roof selected, if you look over here, we get some information, for example, about its slope. So this roof slope is currently 4 and 12, so it rises 4 inches for every 12 inches of run. Now, I could actually change that right here and make it steeper, and you'll see that the walls adjust accordingly. Or I could make it shallower, and the walls continue to adjust accordingly. Of course, right there, that's probably a little too shallow. Why don't we go back to 4 and 12? Let me show you really quickly how that roof was created. Let's say that we wanted to have a little canopy over the front door over here. So to do that, I'm going to go into level 1 floor plan, and I'll zoom in on the front door area, and we will build a really simple little roof right there. So I'm going to click on the roof button. Now it's roof by footprint that we're after. So if you click the drop down portion, just make sure you're choosing that roof by footprint. Now that grays out the drawing and it puts me in a sketching mode. And if you look over here on the ribbon, we have a variety of tools that we can choose from. I'm just going to choose this simple rectangle option right there. And I'm going to click and draw a simple rectangle. I'll use the temporary dimensions as a guide, and I'm not too concerned with the depth here. 9'6" is fine, but I wanted it about 10 feet wide. And to make it sloped, if I finished right now, I would have a perfectly flat roof. To make it sloped, what you do is you click your modify tool to cancel out of the command. And then I want to select both this line and this line and make those sloping edges. Now, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to click here and drag so that it highlights both of those edges. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're dragging to the left. If you drag to the right, it doesn't highlight those two edges, but if you drag to the left, it does. I've got those two selected, and what you do is up here on the options bar, you check this little checkbox right here to make those two edges define slope. Then over here on the properties palette, you can see that the slope is about 7 and 12. So that's awfully steep for this little roof canopy here. So I'm going to drop that down to maybe 4 and 12 to match the roof that we have on the main building. So you just type 4 and press enter, and it will interpret it as 4 and 12. The way that you know that these are sloping edges is they have these little triangles on them. And when I click finish here, this big green checkbox, that will complete the roof. And if we return to 3D, you'll see that little roof right there. The only trouble is that I accidentally built it on the floor. Not that big of a deal. You see the base level says level 1? I'll just come over here and move that up to level 2, and that puts it up where it belongs. So that's a really simple example of creating a roof. Another item that you see here is these curtain wall items here. Now, if I move my mouse around, you see that there's a lot going on. You can see it's highlighting edges and internal components and so forth. So what I'm looking for here, if I move my mouse around, is the dashed outer edge right there. Now, if you're having trouble getting it to highlight that dashed outer edge, you can press the tab key. And each time you tab, it will cycle through different options. You can see there were several there. So there's the dashed edge, but each time I tab, you can see lots of other choices. That's called a curtain wall. Now, a curtain wall is just a more complex wall that's divided into parts and pieces. It is actually a wall. So let me take you here to level 1 floor plan. I'm going to open up level 1 floor plan here on the project browser. And right here in this vestibule area, we have two solid walls right here that we drew in a previous movie. I'm going to select those two using that same crossing window method that we did outside. So again, you click an empty space and drag to the left. Now don't go too far because you'll get the column grid. I want to just touch those two walls right there. Now over here, it should say walls and in parentheses 2. And that's how you know that you've got just two walls selected. I'm going to click this drop down. Now currently it's a generic 5-inch wall. But if you scroll down toward the bottom of the list, notice that there's a curtain wall family, and there's 3 different kinds of curtain walls, and I'm going to choose storefront. And that is how those walls on the outside, or those curtain walls on the outside, were created. They are just curtain walls called storefront. And you can draw them just like you draw any other wall. So let me show you over here. Let's say that we wanted another one of these curtain walls embedded in this wall. Another really nice feature about the curtain wall is if you draw it right on top of another wall, it'll actually cut itself right in there like a window would. So I'm going to click the wall command, open up the drop down. I'll choose that same curtain wall storefront. And then I'll just pick 2 points directly on top of this existing wall, and you'll see it will cut right in there. Now you may notice that it's oriented the opposite way of the one next to it. This little grip right here will take care of that, and all I have to do is flip it. If I go back outside to the 3D view, you can see that I now have this storefront right in here. I'm going to cancel out of there. You'll notice this one starts a little bit off the floor. To do that, you just simply click it, and right here, you type in a value for the base offset from level, and it will raise that up. So that's how those curtain wall objects were created. And there's lots of other elements in here, and you can feel free to look around and explore, but let me just point out one more to you that you might want to look at. If I go back to level 1 floor plan, we have a balcony actually going up on level 2. And here's a stairwell that goes up to that balcony. So Revit has stair tools right here that you can create a stair with, complete with railings. If I go up to level 2 floor plan, there's a floor object out here to make that balcony. Now, the floor object here is almost identical to the roof object that we just looked at. The only difference is none of the edges of this floor are sloped. So that keeps the floor slab perfectly flat, where the roof that we built, we made some of those edges sloped. But if I chose this edit boundary command, you'll see it's the same basic idea that we saw with the roof object. So there's a lot of other model objects. We've got floors, we've got roofs, we've got stairs, we've got curtain walls. There's a variety of tools that we can use to begin to flesh out our models and make them more complete. So I encourage you to spend a little time playing around with them and exploring in this model. And if you want to learn more about the specifics of any of these tools, you can check out Revit Essential Training here at lynda.com.